Step one is to trace off your 2 dart sloper, making sure that you have your darts well indicated. Duplicate of our 2 bodice sloper with the 2 darts, and what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to draw a straight line from the arm of the top dart to the arm of the waist dart. And what you have to do is note how far does this move your apex point. And if it moves your apex point, that becomes the new apex point for the arm of the other dart. So you reconnect the arm of the dart that's closest to the side seam with that new apex. You want the front to be a straight line. Before I cut this apart, I'm going to place my notches, and I'm going to come down 3 inches on the arm of the dart that's closest to center front, both on the shoulder and on the waist. I'm just drawing 1 notch. I'm going to do the same thing on the other arm, so that when you're sewing it together, you have markers that can be lined up. So we're going to follow, this is going to be a straight line, and then we're going to follow the arms that are reconnected to the apex point. Okay? So I'm going to cut this apart on this straight line, and then I'm going to cut this apart right on the arms of the dart. And that eliminates both darts. On the side panel, I'm going to draw a line connecting my apex point to my side seam. I'm lining up my ruler along my side seam and drawing a straight line. That line is perfectly perpendicular to the side seam. I'm going to slash on that line and leave it ever so slightly attached so that I can pivot it open. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tape down my center front panel. And then I'm going to tape down my side panel. And on the side panel, I'm going to spread the panel apart 1/8 of an inch. And these are the 2 pieces for the Princess Bodice. The bust, what you're going to do is just round out the point right here. Okay, just blend it to a smooth curve. Now, what we're going to do next is button and buttonhole placement. This is our center front. One, when you're doing a button, you need to measure the diameter of the button. And the diameter is the distance across. So whatever the distance across of the button, you need to measure that. And in this case, the button measures 5/8 of an inch. So that's what we're going to use as our reference. These are the buttons. So the first thing you need to know is that the extension is always equal to the diameter of the button. Whatever the diameter measures, that's what your extension is. You can extend your neck perpendicularly and extend your waist perpendicularly. So I call this the NFL, which is the new fold line, and that's where the garment is now going to be folded, along that line. The next thing you need to decide is how many buttons are you using. Buttons traditionally are spaced equally apart, but that is really up to you. But very traditionally, they are spaced evenly. So what I do is I like to have extra buttons, more than I think I'm going to use, and I just play with them to see what I like, the distance that I like visually, and then I measure it. And then I say I've laid this down. This is 2 3/4. This is 3. This is about 2 7/8. This is about 2 7/8. I'm going to make them spaced out 3 inches apart, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, and this is center front, correct? Yeah. Buttons, as you can see, are sewn exactly on center front. So the question is, where does the first one get sewn? Everything on buttons you talk about from the center of the button. Okay, all measurements are given from the center of the button. When you tell someone what the distance is between the buttons, it's always center to center that you're indicating. So the center of the first button is placed equal to the diameter of the button. The diameter of the button was 5/8 of an inch. So 5/8 of an inch from the top of the garment goes the first button, no matter what size the button is. And from that point, we measure down 3 inches apart, and that's where all the buttons get placed. Generally, you indicate button placement with X's along center front, okay? And that's how you indicate buttons. So the front of the garment is going to have the buttons placed equal distance down center front, and that's what it's going to look like. Now we're going to talk about buttonholes. As we said before, our button was 5/8 of an inch. Traditionally, what you do is the buttonhole length is 1/8 of an inch longer than the button. So if the button is 5/8 of an inch, the buttonhole is 3/4 of an inch long. That's where you always start. It's always diameter of the button plus 1/8 of an inch, which is 3/4. Of course, there are always exceptions to the rule. This is a very flat button. It probably doesn't need any more length than 1/8 of an inch. If you had a shank button or a domed button or a very high button, you would probably have to add more than 1/8 of an inch length. And that's for you to practice. When you do buttonholes, the rule of thumb, according to my world, is always practice at least 3 buttonholes before you start on the garment. And when you start at the garment, always do the bottom buttonhole first rather than the top. Always go from bottom up. If you make a mistake here, it's a lot better than if you make a mistake at the top. So for this, it's going to be 3/4 of an inch. How do the buttonholes go? They go 1/8 of an inch towards the extension, the rest of the length into the garment. So if it's 3/4 of an inch, it's 1/8 of an inch towards the extension and 5/8 of an inch into the garment. 5/8 into the garment, 1/8 extension. And this is what you do for all the buttonholes. You always want to have all your buttonholes clearly indicated, and clearly indicated both the beginning and the end. You want to make sure all the ends of your buttonholes line up perfectly. and all the beginnings of your buttonholes line up perfectly. There's nothing worse than have buttonholes that are placed at different points, okay? And if you bring your buttonholes out to be done, somewhere like Jonathan's embroidery, they are gonna want them clearly marked. Okay, so here's buttons and buttonholes. The last step is the facing. What you're going to be doing is on this new fold line, you're going to be folding this back. This is your front. It's folded back on your new fold line. And what I'm going to be doing is tracing off the shape of the front until the seam, tracing my neckline, tracing my shoulder, and then unfolding this. And this is how I have the shape of the facing. I'm going to draw this in with my tools where I traced it. Here's my shoulder. Here's my neck. And from here to here, I'm going to connect with my hip curve. And if you look at the shape, I'm going to connect from here to here. And this is the shape, whoops,